Okay. Any other? Good? We're good? Chapter 19, we're good. Okay, chapter 20. So since we just finished talking about bulk flow and transport across the capillary beds, this is a good place to pick up, because we know the capillary beds, the red and the blue on the diagrams, and we understand what happens there based on pressure, osmotic, hydrostatic, and concentration gradients with respect to movement of materials out of the capillary beds and into the tissues that surround. So when things move out of the capillary beds, based on all of the factors we just discussed, and go into the surrounding tissues, we're going to drop things off, right? So in the arterial system, if we talk about respiratory gases, for example, when things are oxygenated in the arteries, when they hit the capillary beds, we're going to drop off what? Oxygen based on pressure gradients. And on the other side, we're going to pick up what? Carbon dioxide based on pressure gradients. And when we talk about the respiratory system, these same terms are going to come up again. And we're going to look at the same kind of diagrams that show us differences in pressures. But the other thing that leaves this end, that doesn't quite get back in this end fast enough, besides respiratory gases, what's all that stuff transported in? In the liquid portion of the blood, right? Plasma. When we talk about transfer of materials, the cells don't leave, the white blood cells and the red blood cells. They stay put. It's plasma that's transporting this stuff, right? Sorry, I'm just trying to turn on my phone. So as that liquid leaves in the capillary beds, we have to eventually reabsorb it in the capillary beds. But again, things are moving kind of quick here in the capillary beds. So the other vessels that we're going to find in the capillary beds, this chapter, the lymphatic vessels, are going to help us get that excess tissue fluid back into the circulatory system. The lymphatic system is a little bit different from the circulatory system. Now, what did we describe the circulatory system as? Was it an open or was it a closed system? It's a closed system. It goes in a loop. How about the lymphatic system? It's got a beginning and it's got an end. So it doesn't go in a loop like the cardiovascular system. The beginning is down here in the capillary beds. And the vessels themselves look very, very similar to veins. So when we talk about the lymphatic system, there's a couple of major jobs that we're going to describe. First of all, the lymphatic system is going to help with the reabsorption of tissue fluids back into the circulatory system. And if you look at this little diagram here, we see the beginning of the lymphatic system starting in the capillary beds. And we're going to run through a series of tubes and tissues before we eventually dump that fluid back into the circulatory system before everybody returns to the heart. So that's one job of the lymphatic system. What's the other job of the lymphatic system? Yeah, it ties into the immune system kind of for sure. Because in its little detoured path, all of those little lumps and bumps you see are lymphatic tissue or lymphatic organs. So the fluid, as it's picked up in the capillary beds, has to travel this extensive pathway, kind of like a maze, and bump into a whole bunch of different tissues and cells before it eventually dumps back into the heart or the circulatory system. Now, why do you think that's going to work for us with respect to immunity? What if something nasty gets into your system? Say you have a virus, for example. Where do you think that virus is going to hang out? Well, viruses like to hang out in your cells, but in order for them to be transported from one cell to the next, they're going to take a ride on the plasma train. Yes? So eventually, if you have enough virus in your system, say the chicken pox, and how long does it take you to really get the full-blown chicken pox? 10 days. Week to 10 days. Okay, why? Yeah, it's got to reproduce itself in your cells, and it's got to travel in your plasma to other cells. Well, some of it eventually is going to get in the plasma that might be reabsorbed in the lymphatic system. And that virus, which has a very specific protein code, which we're going to talk about in chapter 21, when we talk about immunity, is going to be recognized by a group of cells that hang out in those little areas, those little detours that that fluid has to take.
So how come some viruses take a short amount of time?
It's their reproduction rate.
I know, like, when I got like that norovirus thing, I mean, it's at 24 to 48 hour bug, but it can stay into your system up to 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. So it all has to do with the physiology of the particular virus. Some viruses have their effect much, much faster on your system than others. Some viruses hide out in your cells longer periods of time. Some viruses will be with you forever. Anybody get cold sores? Yeah, you have herpes virus. Are you ever going to get rid of it? No. Do you know why? Because herpes virus is very crafty, and it hides out inside your cells. Viruses and their replication mechanisms basically take over your transcription and translation mechanisms within your cells and cause your cells to make more of them. But they're very crafty. They've been around a lot longer than you have, and that you are long gone, they will still be around. I can guarantee that one. Because they have the ability to hide out in their host. So they can lay dormant inside your cells until they feel stress. So when do you get your cold sores?
Stress.
When you're stressed out or you're sick. Sometimes when you get sick, you'll get a cold sore. Because the virus says, whoa, I might lose my meal ticket. I better do what? Reproduce myself and see if I can spread somewhere else, just in case this one. Yes? So that's what viruses have the ability to do. That's a very simplified version of viruses, but they have the ability to do that. So they have very specific proteins on the surface of their cells. And when we talk about the lymphatic system, or the immune response, I should say, in chapter 21, we'll see that the cells that hang out in the lymphatic system, and guess what the majority of those cells are called? They are white blood cells. Which one in particular? Lymphocytes. They're going to hang out in these little bits of tissue. And as that fluid passes by them, this is where they're going to get introduced to anything foreign that might be in that fluid. And we are going to talk again in chapter 21 about the elicitation of an immune response. It depends. Depends on where they are. And when you are in the process of fighting something off, those lymph nodes will get larger. And sometimes, I'll never forget it, I had allergies I started when I was in my 20s with allergies. I never had them as a kid. You know when I started with seasonal allergies? When I was taking a class in college called Vascular Plant Taxonomy. Extremely interesting course. And we had to go out and identify the fall flora and fauna, or whatever, during the height of ragweed season. Yes, and that's when I developed seasonal allergies during that semester. It was horrible. So, and I woke up one morning and I thought I had a brain tumor and was going to die, because every lymph node on the back of my neck was swollen because of my response to the allergens in the environment. So when we talk about an immune response, eliciting an immune response, we're going to talk about the development of cells to help me fight off foreign substances. And they're going to reproduce themselves and create a lot more of them to help me fight off whatever it is. So it gets kind of crowded in the lymph nodes when those cells are actively reproducing themselves. And that's why they get swollen. Yeah, the pressure from the cells themselves reproducing themselves in those lymph nodes. And then remember, I have to travel this maze, the fluid has to travel this maze back to the heart. So when we plug up those lymph nodes with all those cells, we might actually plug up the pathway that fluid is traveling. So sometimes lymph nodes will actually get clogged up. And one of the best things to do is what? Not pop them. You don't want to pop them. Massage them to try and move fluid through them. So lymphatic capillaries are the beginning of the lymphatic system. They have little flaps to allow larger things to enter, more fluid to enter. Not like we described when we talked about the capillaries that had the cells side by side by side, depending on what kind of capillary we were talking about. These endothelial cells have little flaps that allow fluid to enter. We're going to talk about the lymphatic system again when we talk about the digestive system. Anybody know why? Because another thing the lymphatic system is going to help me do, and you better know this if you're in my nutrition class, absorb fats. Exactly. So when we talk about digestive system and absorption of nutrients after the digestive process, again we're going to talk about the lymphatic system, because the absorption of lipids has to happen through the lymphatic system first, because the lipid components are huge and they're not going to be able to fit in the little capillary beds. They have to be absorbed into the lymphatic system first. So those little no. They get broken down in the digestive process. They're going to lose their carriers when they get to their destination. But lymphatic system is going to help me absorb them. And it's going to take the same route. Start in the lymphatic capillaries of the small intestine, take a bypass through the liver for a little processing, and then get dumped into the circulatory system, and then get transported where they need to go. So lymphatic system is very busy. Made of endothelial cells, looks very similar to the venous system. What did the venous system have that the arterial system didn't? Valves. We're going to find them in the lymphatic system as well. So when I talk about the pathway that things have to pass, this diagram is going to show us the extensive network of not only the lymphatic capillaries, but places where I'm going to have to pass by chunks of lymphatic tissue. When we talk about lymphatic tissue, we're talking about small little bits of lymphatic tissue that kind of look like little teeny mini kidneys. And those are called lymph nodes. Tons of them dotted throughout this lymphatic system. We can see them in major areas. There's a lot of them around the abdominal pelvic region because of the digestive process. There's a bunch in different areas, very specific areas, especially around the head, because we want to make sure that everything that passes through fluids there is something that's going to be okay for the brain to handle, so we find quite a bit around the head. Axillary region and that abdominal pelvic region. There's a big gathering of everything that kind of travels through the lower extremities here at the cisterna chyli. And then we're going to see that the fluid from this side of the body, drained by the right lymphatic duct, And then most of the other fluid from the lower extremities, much of the abdominal pelvic, and the other arm, which is what side of the body? The left side of the body is going to drain into the left, into the thoracic duct. That makes sense? So most of the body goes into the left thoracic duct, and that right region will go into the right lymphatic duct. That will eventually dump into the superior what? That then eventually dumps into the heart. Superior vena cava. And that's how that fluid gets back into the circulatory system. So the book talks about lymphatic capillaries, the fact that they're endothelial cells. We know what that means because we talked about that when we talked about capillaries. And then the vessels are going to get larger just like they do in the venous system. Larger lymphatic vessels are going to collect. And again, from that lower extremity, abdominal pelvic region, we're going to see a big collection area in the cisterna chyli. And the reason everybody collects there is pretty much the same reason why we had issues getting fluid back to the heart through the venous system. What do you think we don't have in the lymphatic capillaries that we do in maybe the arteries? Is there any pump here? Does the lymphatic system have a pump? No, no heart, right? So how does that fluid get back? Yeah, remember the muscular pump we talked about when we discussed the venous system? The lower pressure in the system? Well, those same muscular pumps, and especially that one in the thoracic region, when you what? Breathe in and out, is going to help push against those vessels and get fluid back into the circulatory system. So that's why we see that big collection area right there from the lower extremities, because we're going to get a nice push when we breathe in and out and get that fluid back into the circulatory system through the lymphatic vessels. So the lymphatic vessels will get larger. We transport to the right and left side and eventually into the superior vena cava through the thoracic duct and through the right lymphatic duct. And those again will empty into the circulatory system. So I'm transporting excess fluids back into the circulatory system, and these guys, during the transport of that fluid, are going to set up surveillance. So the cells of your immune system are going to be dotted throughout the reticular connective tissue of the lymphatic tissues. You remember what reticular connective tissue looked like? It looks like that. Okay, now we'll take a little trip back to chapter 4 last semester. What is reticular connective tissue made of? Well, connective tissue is always going to have a couple of main components to it. There's going to be some sort of matrix background holding everybody in, right? And what else? Cells. Some sort of cells are going to make those fibers. Fibers. What kind of fibers am I going to find a lot of in reticular connective tissue? Reticular fibers. Very good. And when we think back to chapter 4 and Maria's amazing description of a reticular fiber, what did she say it was like? Like a spider web. Somebody was listening.
He's guessing.
No, he's not guessing. So spider web. Sticky. Who's sticking to the web? There you go. So the cells that I mentioned, the majority of, in the lymphatic system, those lymphocytes that are constantly surveying, under surveillance, I don't know what word I want, you get the point of that fluid that's passing through. And if nasty virus bumps into cell on the spider web, and the cell can recognize it as foreign, guess what it's going to do? It's going to start reproducing itself and set up an immune response. So you have tons and tons of lymph nodes and lymphatic tissue throughout your body where this fluid has to pass through. Say I miss it in one lymph node. Chances are I'm going to pick it up in another lymph node. Huh? Hence what? Hence them being called lymphocytes. Very good.
Now,
Yes?
Is that macrophage consuming that lymphocyte?
That macrophage is probably consuming an antigen-antibody complex, or it could be consuming a foreign invader. So we're going to find macrophages in there too, but the majority of, and what's a macrophage, by the way, since you brought it up? It's a big phagocyte. When we talk about an immune response, we're going to talk about a series of cells that are going to work hand in hand to help protect you from foreign invaders. In the lymphatic system, most of the cells we're going to find are going to be lymphocytes. The other guys are going to help out. And again, when we describe an immune response, we're going to talk about those guys and their role. So we will find amongst the reticular fibers mostly lymphocytes, but then we'll find things like macrophages that are going to help me clean up debris that we find in the lymphatic system as well. So in your textbook, they talk about lymph transport. Again, think venous system when you think about lymph transport. We need those muscular pumps to give us a little pressure on the tubes to help push that fluid back. And we have to travel through lymphoid cells and tissues. So in our travels, we're going to have to pass by the surveyors. And the big surveyors are going to be lymphocytes. There's two different types of lymphocytes. What are they? T cells and B cells. Remember when you had to memorize your white blood cell maturation progression? And at the bottom, we saw lymphocyte. And then under that, there was something called the plasma cell. Was that in the circulatory system? Say no. Very good. B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes are going to work together in an immune response. And the B lymphocytes have the ability to morph into something called a plasma cell and leave the circulatory system, go into the tissues, and make something called an antibody. Remember when we did our blood typing? You know what an antibody is, right? What's an antibody? It's a chemical protein structure that has the ability to neutralize a very specific, what it was made for, antigen. Yes? Is that ringing a bell? When we talked about the ABO blood group antigens, they were on the surface of cells, right? And remember I defined an antigen for you? What did I define it as? Something that had the ability to elicit an immune response. So that's kind of like the street sign on the surface of cells that tells who you are. Kind of like your name tag. Our cells, and you've heard this, I know, learn to recognize self-antigens. And where do they get their schooling? T-cell kindergarten. Where? The thymus. The thymus is a large group of lymphatic tissue or lymphatic organ where these cells go to become, you ready for the big word? Immunocompetent. That's basically a fancy way of saying we can do it, we can recognize self-antigens, we can protect you from foreign invaders. After they pass kindergarten, where are they going to go? They're going to go set up house someplace in the lymphatic system. So when we talk about lymphocytes, some lymphocytes are very old. They went to kindergarten, they passed their classes, and then they went to work in part of the lymphatic system somewhere. They're going to hang there for a long, long time. So when we talk about T cells, And B cells, we're going to talk about them helping us with an immune response. And they hang out in the lymphatic system. We're also going to find other cells like macrophages that are going to help get rid of things. And this is an example of lymphoid tissues. This is a lymph node. Anybody ever play, the word just went out of my head, pinball? You ever play pinball? There's a whole bunch of little, you got a little silver ball on the bottom, and it comes into this, and it bangs into that, and it bangs into that, and it bounces all over the place, and every time it bounces into something, you get points. Well, think of a pinball machine when you think of a lymph node, because that fluid is going to come into this kind of pinball machine structure. It can only come in one way because lymphatic vessels also have what? Valves. To prevent what? Backflow. Very good. So I'm going to come into the pinball machine here. And look at all of these little flippers that we find inside the lymph node. Yes? Things are going to come in, fluid's going to come in and bang over there and maybe bang over there, and then eventually make it out here and get out here and bang into there and maybe bang into there, and eventually maybe get in here and bang into that and bang into this until eventually they do what? Make their way out. Those trabeculae, we've seen that word before, right? Where do we see that word? When we talked about spongy bone, cancellous bone, yes?
Yes.
Same kind of structures we're going to find in the lymphatic system, same name. And they're going to house little groups of cells sticking to the spider webs, yes? In these little areas that are cordoned off by each of the trabeculae. So in each of the little areas, we're going to have a whole bunch of cells hanging out on spider webs. What kind of fibers? Reticular fibers. And fluid is going to pass through them. Each of those little layers is divided. It has a cortex with lymphoid follicle, a germinal center, and then like a capsule area that sort of holds the spider webs all in. We're going to find several of those in every single lymph node. Do you see how this is so effective now? Again, I might have a nasty little virus that makes it past these guys. Nobody recognizes them, and then it gets caught up in here, and nobody recognizes them. But eventually, between this lymph node and all the other hundreds of lymph nodes that has to pass through, somebody eventually is going to recognize it as foreign. So it's a very efficient system. It's a one-way system. It's only going to go in one direction, start in the capillary beds, end up in the circulatory system up at the superior vena cavas. And you can only come in one way through the afferent lymphatic vessels, and you can only leave one way through the efferent. So lymph nodes and the structure of lymph nodes is something that you should be familiar with. In lab, guess what you're going to do? Yeah, we're going to go draw it. I'm going to look at it under the microscope. But when you look at it under the microscope, find those little areas. The whole lymph node's covered with a capsule to keep it intact. So you saw in that little diagram before tons and tons of lymph nodes. We also have larger patches of the same type of tissue. We call it lymph tissue or lymph organs. Just bigger, that's all. So know the structure of a lymph node. Understand how things circulate through a lymph node. Under homeostatic imbalances, they talk about some of the problems associated with the lymphatic system when things get blocked up in the lymphatic system. So if fluid can't move through freely, fluid is going to build up from behind and cause all sorts of problems. When the cells are actively recognizing foreign invaders, they're going to start to reproduce themselves to help fight off foreign invaders. And they talk a little bit about something called bubonic plague. Yeah, black plague. And swollen, like swollen big time glands. Not a fun little disease to go through back in the Middle Ages. Another thing that we find the lymph nodes can also be is secondary places for cancer cells to set up. When cancer cells start growing, they might decide that they need to move on to someplace else and set up house. And what's the best place to do that in? The lymphatic system. So if cells can get into the lymphatic system and start their travels, lymph nodes might be a secondary site for tumors to also set up house and grow.
My grandma had breast cancer. They called it like stage 1. I guess that's like organs and lymph
Yep.
nodes or whatever, so it doesn't spread throughout.
Correct. And a lot of times if they catch a cancer that has progressed into stage 3 or stage 4, they're also going to do what? They're going to, not only if they go in surgically to remove the cancer itself, they're also going to try and remove some of the lymphatic system around that tumor as well.
So is that the point of like chemo and stuff?
Well, chemo's going to go in and then hopefully kill off the cells that have set up house in different places. But sometimes lymph nodes in the area will be removed as well. What's the problem with that? Those tissue fluids can also build up because we don't have the lymphatic system to help. So some edemas in certain swelling in certain places might occur.
Is that why they put like I know like my grandma had surgery, they had some drainage fluid pump thing?
Yep. Exactly. So to help push what vessels are left to help give that pressure and push that fluid back to where it's supposed to be. So lymphoid organs are just larger patches of lymphatic tissue. Believe it or not, most of your lymphatic system, you know where it is? Nope. It's in your digestive system. Little groups of tissue called Peyer's patches, also part of the lymphatic system. Your appendix, everybody's met that before. What's your appendix for? Everybody thinks it's useless. Well, no, it's not. It's part of the lymphatic system. So it's lymphoid tissue. Actually, some scientists believe that in early man, the appendix actually had the ability to produce enzymes to break down cellulose. Can we do that anymore? No, we can't break down cellulose. Did you know that? If you're in my nutrition class, you know that. So you don't have the enzymes to break down cellulose, all the cell walls of all the plants that you eat. But again, theory says maybe that's what the appendix was for in early man, to break down cellulose. But now we know it as part of the lymphatic system, lymphoid tissue. Another big group of tissue we see that we call an organ in the lymphatic system is the spleen, the thymus, and the tonsils. Back in my day, tonsils, when they got swollen, what did they do? Rip them out. We don't need them. Well, yeah, you do. Now we realize that's your first line of defense. Where are your tonsils? So everything you breathe in and everything you put in your mouth, we have sets of tonsils that are going to help set up surveillance for stuff coming in. And last time I checked, I didn't sterilize the air that I breathed or the food that I ate. Right? And you'll notice in younger kids, like there's a certain age where your kids, you'll look in your kid's mouth and their tonsils are always going to be swollen. Because their body is getting used to new foreign invaders that your body's already used to. So you'll go through a good period of time in the teen years where your tonsils are always going to be swollen. The only time they take them out now is when we develop secondary infections because of the swollen tissue. Strep is one.
I got it like twice a month for a year, and I got mine out when I was like 7.
Yeah, so sometimes when we keep getting repeated strep infections, it kind of becomes a place where we house that nasty bacteria, so we'll get rid of them then. But typically that's pretty much the only time we get rid of tonsils. So if you have kids, expect that their tonsils are going to be swollen. It's because their body's learning all of these new foreign invaders. It sucks. All right, so that's lymphoid organs. They talk a little bit about the spleen, where we're going to find areas, those little compartments that have very specific names in the spleen. We find areas called white pulp, and we find areas called red pulp. Again, the spleen is a very highly vascular organ that's going to help with surveillance. It's going to store and break down old red blood cells, for example. It's going to store platelets. It's going to store monocytes. And it helps with the release of those when they're needed in an immune response. In the fetus, the spleen is the site where erythrocytes are actually produced until we do what? Yeah, develop that bone marrow, develop that red bone marrow. So that's going to stop after birth. Can you live without your spleen? Yes. Why can you live without your spleen? Because you get all those other lymphatic organs to help kick in if the spleen goes away. Spleen, when it becomes ruptured, because it's very highly vascular, can be extremely dangerous because you can bleed to death really, really quick.
So if you lose any of these organs, doesn't it drop your immune system?
Theoretically, yes. But you have so many others to pick up the slack. And that's why we realize it's not okay to just rip out tonsils anytime, unless there's a very good reason for that, because we are decreasing your ability to fight off foreign invaders. So, the thymus, and that's going to be located, sitting pretty much right on top of the heart. You have a very big thymus when you're born. Do you have a big thymus now? No. Very small, almost dysfunctional. But your thymus, sitting on top of your heart, is where your T cells are going to become what? What's that fancy word? Immunocompetent. And that's going to happen when you're young, believe it or not. You're going to learn what self is. Those cells are going to learn what self is when you are very young. So in the thymus, we're going to become immunocompetent if I'm a T cell. And then they're going to get sent to the other lymphatic organs, either a lymph node or a larger group of organs, to hang out and wait for nasty little critters to come by. The other thing they talk about is something called Mucosa-Associated Lymphoid Tissue. Where might I find Mucosa-Associated Lymphoid Tissue? Tonsils is one of them. In mucous membranes. Where are mucous membranes? Anything that leads to what? The outside. Okay, so mucus is going to help trap nasty invaders that try to get into our body from openings to the outside. Yes? And the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue is loaded with cells that can do what? Recognize them as foreign and try to fight them off. So when we talk about MALT, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, places like the tonsils, we have palatine tonsils. Where might they be? Yeah, in the palatine region where the palatine bone is. Lingual tonsils associated with your tongue. Pharyngeal tonsils near the pharynx. And when we talk about digestive system and respiratory system, we're going to meet the pharynx. It's a common tube where food and air passes down into your body. We'll find tonsils there. And then we have something called tubal tonsils. And the opening of the auditory tubes. Give me another name. That eustachian tube? Yeah, pharyngeal. Go find it in your book. Tell me what it is. The auditory tube. It leads from where? Down into your throat. So we need surveillance there because something nasty might get into my mouth and work its way up that tube into my middle ear, right? So we want to make sure we have surveillance there as well. Peyer's patches. So again, all of these guys are just a little bit different as to where their germinal centers are and how each of those are packaged and separated. But they're all little, think of them as pinball machines in just a different setup. Peyer's patches. We're going to find lots of those in where? The digestive system. Because last time I checked, you don't sterilize your food, right? So you want to make sure that if anything gets past gastric juices in the digestive process, that we have somebody surveying the area to keep you protected as we absorb those materials in the intestines. So they talk about Peyer's patches.
So what would be a specific bacteria or virus that might not have passed your gastric?
Well,
I mean, like, for the most part, a lot
there's
of
a,
inside.
for the most part, but not all,
No,
especially viruses. So there's a lot of different viruses. Specific, I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head. One specific bacteria is something called H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori. Not all of us have it. Anybody have ulcers in this room? No? Nobody has an ulcer? Anybody know somebody with an ulcer? Okay, this bacteria, we thought for many, many years that the environment in our stomach was so harsh that there was no way that anything could survive it. And we find out we're very, very wrong. Many viruses can survive it, and this particular bacteria, H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori, can survive it as well. And it actually causes you to produce a lot more acid in the stomach region, and that's what leads to ulcers. I couldn't tell you that either off the top of my head. Yeah. But we somehow ingest it through whatever it infects. And then it kind of hangs out there and causes some problems. So the appendix, large offshoot of the beginning of the large intestine. And again, we thought that maybe it would help us digest cellulose way back when in early man. But it is part of the lymphatic system as well. And developmental stuff, we don't care. And we're on to chapter 21. So, take out your clickers. We'll get a couple questions in. And that way I can take attendance. Lymphatic vessels. That's supposed to be A, B, C, D. Very good. The first one's A, the second one's B, the third one's C, and the fourth one is D. So, does everybody have their clicker today? Because you're supposed to bring it to class with you every single day? Always, always? There's more than 19 people here, I know that. 5, 4. There's more than 25 people here. That's not a good place for you to be. 2. Click something, anything. Only 28 of you have clickers today? What's the answer? The answer is A. Oh, pretty good. So remember, drains excess fluid from interstitial. What's that word? What's interstitial? It's between what? So it's outside the circulatory system, kind of between all of the tissues. Next, lymphatic capillaries owe their permeability to the presence of. Everybody knows what permeability is, right? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's the answer? The answer is B. Those little mini valves, not minivans, mini valves. Why isn't that? There it is. One more. Ooh. Get this out of the way. So which of the following represents a logical sequence of structures that contribute to the return of fluid into the blood via the lymphatic system? So where does it start and where does it end? This should be easy. Where does the lymphatic system start? Five, 4, 3, 2. What do you think? It starts in the capillaries, right? So that's easy. Don't even have to go on to any of the other choices. Because why? That's not right. That's this stupid program. Where the heck is my little dot? You put that too? Oh, there it is. Correct. It is hot in here. All right, one more. Which of the following contributes to the flow of lymph through lymphatic vessels? And think about the venous system. What helped flow there? How does fluid get through the lymphatic system? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Today's Thursday, right? Oh, good. Yeah. What's the answer? D. Oh, wait a minute. All right? So let's start chapter 21. Any questions on chapter 20? That was easy. Chapter 21? Not so easy. It's As a matter of fact, chapter 21 is one of the most difficult chapters in this textbook. Sorry.
Thank you for putting it behind the other chapters.
You're welcome. So chapter 21, and this, you have an interactive physiology for chapter 21. I highly suggest you look at it because it's going to help you quite a bit. Has to do with our immune system. Now, our immune system is a group of tissues and cells that are constantly under surveillance, keeping you what? Healthy. Now, the first line in the book, you ready? And some paranoid people might be scared of this. Every second of every day, armies of hostile bacteria, fungi, and viruses swarm on your skin, and yet we stay amazingly healthy most of the time. You are constantly under attack, 24/7, 365 days a year, 366 during leap year. Yes? So why are you not always sick? It's because of these guys. So your immune system, huh? There are a bunch of little ninjas. I like that. So there's two major divisions of the constant surveillance you are under. There is one called innate immunity, and this is very non-specific. Non-specific in the sense of, I know it doesn't belong, I will kill it. Don't know what it is, I know it doesn't belong, I will kill it. Yes? So your skin is the beginning of that. It covers you and protects you from all of the nasty little critters that are outside your body. So when we talk about innate defenses, non-specific, we begin with the skin and the barriers it sets up. Remember those mucous membranes I was talking about? When you breathe in that nice, clean, fresh, filtered, sterile air that you breathe in, has all kinds of nasty little schmutz in it. And if it can get caught up there at the beginning, it won't get down into my body and make me sick. So things like skin and mucous membranes are beginning barriers for you. When you go into interactive physiology and you look at the immune system portion of it, it's going to describe this whole scenario as like a castle with protectors that surround it constantly. So you are the castle, and there's defenders that are defending you from any foreign invaders that might get into your castle. The other thing, once things maybe get past those beginning defenses, still in the non-specific category, are things inside your body that are going to help get rid of foreign invaders. So remember those macrophages we talked about before? And somebody said, is that eating a white blood cell? No, it's probably eating something it knows doesn't belong. Doesn't know exactly what it is, just knows what? It doesn't belong, and I need to get rid of it. So phagocytes, and we talked about phagocytes in macrophages, we talked about phagocytes in neutrophils when we talked blood. Those are also part of innate defenses, non-specific. But these are guys that are on the inside. When I cut myself, and we talked about an inflammatory response, and we talked about things like diapedesis. Is that ringing a bell? Remember the term opsonization? All of that stuff is part of the internal defenses. An inflammatory response is non-specific defense. Basically going to say something isn't right, and I need to get these cells here to make sure whatever it is doesn't get down deeper into my body. We also have lots of different proteins that we'll find floating around in plasma. And we'll also find these same proteins on the surface of your skin that help to protect you from foreign substances. And these are called antimicrobials. And then we also give off substances when we become infected with certain invaders that will actually raise our temperature. Yeah, and that's what fever is caused by. Substances called pyrogens that will increase your core body temperature. Pyro makes sense, right? Now, why would I blessedly ever want to do that? Yeah, certain organisms are very temperature sensitive. So just a small raise in temperature can cause them to blow up. To say it again?
Move around faster too, right? The higher the temperature.
Well, molecules.
They won't move as fast. If it's higher temperature, they can move around.
They move around faster, and so do your chemicals move around faster as well. So you give off substances to help raise that temperature a bit. Are you the person that the minute they get a temperature like 99.9, they immediately grab the bottle of Advil and down as many as you possibly can? Yeah, don't do that, because your body is doing that for a reason. Once the fever starts to get a little bit too high, that can also cause problems to your cells as well. So we don't want to get the fever too high, and that's when we should take those anti-inflammatory drugs that help bring down fever. And then the second part that we're going to talk about in your defense mechanism is if these guys make it past all of the non-specific stuff and they get down deeper into your body. We're going to talk about something called adaptive defenses. These are very specific. These cells, and you see our friends down there at the bottom, our B cells and our T cells, are going to notice substances very specifically. Remember those antigens I talked about on the surface of your cells? Your name tags? Well, all organisms have them. Viruses have them. Bacteria have them. You have them. These are the guys that can notice or I should say read the name tags. They notice specific invaders. We're going to talk about the B cells and talk about humoral immunity. And this is the production of chemicals to help neutralize foreign substances. What are those chemicals called, do you know? Say it out loud. Antibodies. And then we kind of need, and I call the T cells, especially one that has a very specific cellular marker called CD4, because believe it or not, all of those cellular markers have a name. And if you become an immunologist, you will know them all. Well, one cellular marker called CD4 on the surface of T cells is going to tell us that this T cell is going to help organize everybody else in an immune response. I call it the CD4 positive T cell, kind of the cruise director of the entire immune response. So two divisions of immune response. A whole bunch of different players protecting your castle. The first thing we're going to talk about then is innate. And innate is what? Who? Non-specific. I know something doesn't belong. I'm going to protect you from foreign invaders. So the first thing they talk about is surface barriers. Skin and mucosa. When we talk about the secretions on the surface of your skin, and did you know you have secretions on the surface of your skin? Who puts them out there? Sebaceous and? This is a trip back to chapter 5. 2 S words. Sudoriferous and sebaceous glands. Remember those guys? We found them in the dermis. Remember them? Well, their secretions are extremely important to help keep you protected on surface barriers, your skin. So when we look at what those secretions are made of, one of the things, if we took a pH paper to your secretions, we would find out they're acidic. Why? Do bacteria like acidic environments? No, they do not. It makes them blow up. Not good. The secretions and their acid content are called your acid mantle. So that's going to help protect you from foreign substances. The other thing we're going to find in those secretions are enzymes that do the same thing. Blow up bacteria. They're called lysozymes. We find them in saliva. We find them in mucus. We find them in tears. Mucin is another sticky substance we find in mucous membranes, digestive tract. It's going to help protect you from nasty little critters that make it there. Defensins, also a group of small chemicals that are going to help protect you from bacteria, fungus, slows their reproduction down. Because bacteria and fungus can reproduce at a very fast rate. Some lipids in sebum. What's sebum? Yeah, wax, more of a waxy secretion. We find it in earwax. And it's toxic to bacteria. So all of those things together in your secretions are going to help protect you in that, what's it called again? Non-specific or innate. The next thing they talk about are cells. So we got the surface stuff down. We got a whole bunch of chemicals squirted all over the surface of our body. If somebody makes their way in, we have to talk about the guys that are inside. Phagocytes. And oh, look! Numbers! Things in order. Essay question. Very good. Very perceptive. Could be a possible essay question. You already know this, don't you? When did you learn phagocytosis? Last semester, beginning. So let's just review it quick. So phagocyte, that's a cell that can do what? Kind of wrap its little membrane around things and create a pocket around things. Correct. So phagocytes can phagocytize, create little pockets around foreign invaders. This is such a cool picture. I love this picture. This is an actual phagocyte. What are these little green things? Not Staphylococcus. Actually, it's Bacillus. Rod-shaped bacteria. So these little green things are some kind of bacteria, and that cell is reaching its little arms around it to phagocytize it. So again, non-specific. Knows it doesn't belong. Let's try to get rid of it before it gets down deep into the body. Through phagocytosis, we can capture it. Phagocyte forms something called a pseudopod, false foot. In biology class, you might have looked at amoebas. That's how they move. They create the little false feet and kind of swim through their fluid. Phagocytes can create the false feet and engulf things. And it's going to take those little phagosomes where they've trapped any nasty little critters in it and merge it with what? Nasty chemicals called lysosomes. This is called a phagolysosome. You ringing a bell? So I pour all the nasty chemicals all over the bacteria. What happens to the bacteria? Blows up. Can't function very well when I blow up. Now I have all little dead bacteria body parts. Spit it. No, we can't use spit it out. Exocytosis. Get rid of all the dead body parts, and that's part of the waste that your other systems get rid of. Yes? So that's how phagocytes work. Well, it's not just phagocytes. Please remember, in order for me to phagocytize something, it's kind of going to stick to my surface. So I have other cells that will actually run around sprinkling stuff on nasty little critters. Kind of like putting salt on things.
This is what's been there.
Yeah, say, ooh, that doesn't belong. I will put some chemicals on it. That process is called opsonization. And once I've been sprinkled with chemicals from these other cells in the response, that'll allow me to stick to the surface of phagocytes. So, know the term opsonization. The other cell they talk about is something called a natural killer cell. Now, I can't use, some of my material is quite old because I happen to be quite old. But there was an old horror movie way back when, and you probably, none of you have ever seen it. I'd be surprised. Well, maybe you've seen it. Karen Black. This little voodoo doll with a little, it was the stupidest B movie I've ever seen. But this little possessed voodoo doll with a spear was part of the scary part of this movie that would come out from under the bed and stab Karen Black in the foot with its little spear. I can't even remember the name of the movie. But every time I think of natural killer cells, I think of that really bad B movie. I know I did. Not really old. See, I'm really old. So natural killer cells have the ability to sort of poke holes in things, just like the little possessed voodoo doll in the bad B movie, with chemicals that will end up at the same result. If I poke a big hole in your side, what's going to happen to your innards? They're going to spill out all over the place, and you're not going to be able to function very well. So groups of cells that kind of police the area as well, called natural killer cells. And natural killer cells are also a subgroup of T cell. They have a different cellular marker, though. They don't have CD4, because CD4 positive T cells are the cruise directors, remember? They have another marker called CD8. And they're going to help police the area. Just kind of stab things that don't belong. Poke holes in things. Non-specific. The next thing they talk about is inflammation. And that's probably a good place to pick up on Tuesday of next week. Now, before you go, guess what's online for you? Your next quiz. Guess when you take it. Between now, when it opens up at 11 a.m. and Tuesday before 9:25 a.m. Yes, and when you sit down to take your quiz, no Googling the answers. Understand? You study for your quiz, then you sit down and you take your quiz. That's why you only get 15 minutes. You're not supposed to sit there with your book and go find the answers. Because A, you're not going to have enough time. And B, if you start Googling crap, chances are you're going to hit the wrong button and get kicked out of your exam. So study, then take the quiz. Hold on one second.